Hi everyone, welcome to a documentary day. This is a new thing. We actually haven't done this before, but I thought it would be fun if we just had a day every once in a while where we watched a bunch of short documentaries on YouTube and stuff. I'm sure many of us do this in our free time anyway, just getting to hang out and watch like little informative things about things we maybe never thought of or things we're curious about. So I thought it would be fun if we just did a marathon of those for like 3 hours. They're on average 10-ish minutes long each. I don't have enough for the full hour, so if you have any, feel free to send them. Keep them in the 10-minute average range if you have any that you find interesting. But of course I can find plenty. I just wanted to leave it open on the schedule, so if anyone had anything that they wanted to share, there would be room for that. I didn't want to be too locked in. Littlest Little Leafy, thanks for gifting a sub. And Citosaurus, thanks for gifting a sub. Appreciate ya. Ooh, here's a quick clip. This isn't a documentary, but it is beautiful. This store accidentally marked this half wheel of Parmesan cheese for $10 instead of $10 a pound. So this guy got a whole half wheel of Parmesan cheese for $10.
Somebody else put that label on there.
That doesn't mean we need it. Why would you buy that much cheese?
Why wouldn't you buy... If you get... To be clear, that much Parmesan cheese is worth like $800 to $1,000, depending on like... depending on what kind of cheese it is, if it's actual like Parmesan Reggiano or like some other kind of Parmesan cheese, because there's a legal distinction. Annie Kai, thanks for gifting a sub. 94% to level 1. So, like, you could actually make a lot of money selling that to someone. I don't know if you wanted, you could maybe go to, like, a deli or something. I don't know who you'd sell the cheese to. I don't know a cheese fence. But, at minimum, that's a crazy deal. $10 for half a wheel of parm is crazy.
I was trying to FaceTime you, and you wouldn't answer the phone, so I made an executive decision. I didn't do anything wrong.
Oh, Parmesan keeps great because it's a very low moisture cheese. It's very dry, so as long as you keep it in a, like, cool, dry place, it's fine. You could keep that on a shelf for quite a while. I would refrigerate it, probably, but if I could. But you could conceivably store that on a shelf.
Something labeled at a price, and I bought.
And how much did you pay for that?
Approximately $10.44.
And how many pounds of cheese is
Probably
that?
like 20. Maybe more.
And what are we going to do?
No clue.
About 20 pounds of Parmesan. You are really proud of yourself, aren't you? 44 pounds of cheese?
I'm jealous. I'm jealous of the copious amounts of cheese. I'm just going to start an Amazon wish list, and it's going to be different kinds of cheese you guys can send me. I Like Pie, thanks for 3 months, says, "Hey Hannah, me and my partner are really enjoying your streams. Thanks for all the laughs." Well, thanks for watching. If you didn't laugh, it wouldn't be funny. Oh, guys, Thanksgiving was so fun, by the way. Got to hang out with the family. Got to hang out with Mr. Blast and Broha Blast. Mother Blast. It was really good. And the mac and cheese that I made was delicious. It was, like, really, really, really good. Hydrate. So, I'll just have you know, if you ever find yourself around some Hannah's mac and cheese, which is what I've decided to call this recipe that my wife found on the internet that I just followed step by step. Get yourself some Hannah's mac and cheese. Alright, we can get into some of these short documentaries. Here's one on FTX, the recent cryptocurrency exchange that went defunct. Someone asked for a link to that last thing. Here you go.
Somebody else put that label on there.
There you go. Alright, so this is a short documentary on the rise and fall of FTX, the crypto exchange which recently went default and took a lot of crypto down with it.
This is Motherboard Editor-in-Chief Jason Kebler. I'm here with Edward Angueso Jr. and Emily Lipstein, and we're here to talk about FTX, which has just imploded.
Oh, sorry. First name bunch of numbers said... how does chat feel about the channel Fascinating Horror? Covers disasters and stuff. Might be too heavy a topic for the stream, but they're really well done, and I generally recommend. I think I actually have one from them pulled up, so I do believe I'm aware of them. Citisaurus says, "I didn't get to have Thanksgiving since I'm sick, which is unfortunate. I just chilled at home and fell asleep in my computer chair. We'll be doing it next weekend instead. I can't wait for turkey and my grandma's amazing rolls she makes. Well, I hope you stuff yourself with rolls. I hope they're delicious."
It is one of the largest crypto disasters of all time.
36% to level 2 on the hype train, by the way. I'm being a bad train conductor.
They owe more than 1 million people money. Edward, what is FTX?
So FTX is a cryptocurrency exchange. It's the second largest one. It's a place where you can go and take your dollars and exchange them for any cryptocurrency that you want, but also for more complex trades or financial instruments that are connected to cryptocurrency. And so customers have put billions of dollars there, I think over 13 billion, and last week realized that they weren't able to take any of the money out FTX said that, this was fine. They were just going through a little bit of a bump. And by the next day, we're filing bankruptcy, claiming that they didn't have enough money to offer everyone withdrawals from the exchange.
Right. And so they have this sort of really well-known leader, CEO, founder named Sam Bankman-Fried.
The documentaries on this, like the full-fledged ones, are going to be so interesting because he and his team in the Bahamas, because he opened their office in the Bahamas, so he and the people he cared about could live there, they were in like some kind of polycule. So it was like a big crypto polycule, and they were also stealing billions of dollars. Like, I do feel bad for the victims, but at the same time, it's crypto, you knew what you're getting into, at least I'd hope so. Seems like the drama, and I live for the drama. Citosaurus, thanks for gifting a sub. 64% to level 2 with 40 seconds left.
He is a 30-year-old who was worth $16 billion, and he was supposed to be the world's first trillionaire, according to some media profiles of him. Emily, what sort of role did FT?
If the second someone becomes a trillionaire, the Earth should just self-immolate. That's the button where we failed, right? We failed so fundamentally in allocating resources to people who need them. Like, billionaires are bad enough. A trillionaire? I'd rather not.
FTX have in the broader consciousness, who is Sam Bankman-Fried hanging out with?
Yeah, I mean, just starting off, you might remember that Larry David.
Moppy Mutton says, my dear mother passed away last night. Growing up, she was a waitress at Quality Pie, a 24-hour place here where Darcel, top local drag queens, and LGBTQ community went. She made me a cis ally. We love and support all of you. I'm really sorry to hear about your mom passing. She sounds great, though.
Big commercial.
Thanks for the hype train, everyone.
Super Bowl last year.
I don't think so. And I'm never wrong about this stuff. Never.
That was for FTX. Tom Brady had investments there. Gisele Bündchen. Even the umpires during the most recent World Series had the FTX logo on the side of their uniforms. But even beyond that, there's kind of been a lot of talk in a gossipy kind of way about the situation that Sam Bankman-Fried and a lot of the higher ups at FTX and a related company called Alameda Research, they're based in the Bahamas, and there's lots of talk of it being like a polycule. The CEO of Alameda Research, this girl named Caroline Ellison, had this Tumblr blog that was unearthed, and basically she described the various structures of the relationships between everybody living in this place in the Bahamas.
Oh my god, I forgot to say, the poly relationship that they were in, she very explicitly on her Tumblr page talked about how she doesn't like how most poly relationships are non-hierarchical. Meaning, again, everyone is equal within them. There might be different relationships, but it's a flat structure to ensure equity. And she basically posited that within poly relationships, it should be basically a vicious power struggle with a strict power hierarchy that is manipulated and vied for. It just sounded disgusting. It was like the ANCAP version of polyamory. It was terrible. And I'm totally cool with people being polyamorous. I have no issue with that. I don't I'm happy everyone's happy as long as it's all consenting. But that sounds like an abusive relationship structure regardless of how many people are in the relationships. Doodly Do X, thanks for 7 months, says, woo, 7 months. Like a monarch with a harem. Kind of, yes.
As this Chinese harem where everybody was ranked in terms of their relationship structure, which lot of stuff going on there.
Right. And so Sam Bankman-Fried, there was a New Yorker profile that stated that he only wears pants when he's testifying in front of Congress. He was hanging out with all these DC types, and he was supposed to legitimize cryptocurrency. He was sort of seen as the responsible one in industry that's known for all these Ponzi schemes and scams and so on and so forth. And it's Edward, I mean, he's just like the rest of them. like this dude is now perhaps under federal investigation.
Yeah, and I think one thing that's surprising maybe is that it was to a larger degree. I mean, he took $13 billion of customer money and gave it to Alameda or used it for risky bets that have left him with maybe $900 million of assets that can be sold, which is why they declared bankruptcy, because they don't have anybody's money anymore. They have a multi-billion-dollar hole in the account now. And I think also this is also going to reverberate right throughout the.
This, I believe, is something that's pretty common. Like, I'd imagine if you went to like Binance, which I think is the #1 cryptocurrency exchange now, that I mean, they already were, but FTX went down, they were #2. I bet if you went to Binance's, like, actual finances, they probably don't have enough reserves for their, like, accounts either. I just think the whole thing is backed up by, let's just say, the secret ingredient is fraud. They're, like, using these vaporous stable coins like Tether, where they just print all sorts of brand new stable coins. Stable coins, if you don't know, is a concept in cryptocurrency where the token is always supposed to be equivalent to some fiat currency. So you could have a stable coin that's pegged to the US dollar, for instance, which is very common. Tether has that. So anyway, instead of being backed up by real-life dollars, sometimes these companies will be backed up by tethers or other stable coins, which are basically IOUs to these other companies like Tether that probably also aren't actually holding the cash. The entire crypto ecosystem has basically been a funnel, stealing money from people and funneling it up to the people in charge of these companies. In my opinion. This is all my opinion. Meanwhile, everyone has these IOUs in their various companies, you know? And they're all holding IOUs with each other to make it look like they all have money when they don't have the assets to back up the deposits. Oh.
The little ecosystem in crypto, because FTX had also come in earlier this year offering bailout packages, offering credit, offering loans to struggling exchanges. And now it is not able to, provide any of that money. It also provided grants to media outlets. It provided grants to charitable foundations. So all of this money dries up because they were too busy gambling it on.
I'm very familiar with the fractional reserve banking. I'm saying that even by the standards of having like a fraction of the reserves available that you would need to pay out all the deposits, like, it's not even close. I don't think they have virtually any cash relative to the deposits. And on top of that, at the very least, banks are FDIC insured. No crypto is FDIC insured. So, like, the crypto exchange goes insolvent and goes bankrupt, your money's just gone, whereas at least in banks, it's insured by the United States government. I think it's like up to $100,000 per account. 250? I don't know what it is right now.
Other crypto stuff. And this is, we're going to be feeling the consequences of that for a while.
Right. I mean, essentially, the reporting has shown that they were basically taking customer money and investing it in other ventures. And then when the customers wanted to pull it out, they were like, well, there's no money to pull out. There was a court filing earlier this week stating that, they may owe more than 1 million customers money. And so a lot of people are going to be really mad about this. I think it's important to talk also a little bit about, like, Sam Bankman-Fried has been seen as this kind of like boy genius who was supposed to legitimize crypto, but also was part of this weird Silicon Valley philosophy known as effective altruism, where basically you try to make as much money as humanly possible and then donate it to causes that you believe to be worthy. And so, I mean, there's all these profiles of him basically like sleeping on beanbag chairs and living in this like weird Bahamas penthouse where allegedly everyone's sleeping with each other. FTX apparently also had a company therapist that was like helping people look for dating options, which is a story we did earlier this week. It's a very messy situation. And as you mentioned, I think that there's going to be like quite a lot of fallout from this, both on like a social level and a reputation level, but also, you know, a lot of people are losing a lot of money here.
Yeah, the scale of money that's going to be lost, I think that's just going to threaten the ability of crypto to make the case that institutions should use it, right? If the most trustworthy face was engaged in a really deeply fraudulent scheme that investigators across the country are interested in, pursuing criminal charges for, then that doesn't speak too well for the rest of the ecosystem, right? So it's going to be hard, especially because they've lost money on this. Canada had a pension fund that was, I think, about $90 million in the hole after FTX's bankruptcy.
I want to know who made the decision that the teachers' pension fund should put money into any sort of crypto anything,
right? So,
much less $95 million.
You're not going to get pension fund investors, you're not going to get university endowments. You're going to get a lot of the money, a lot of the big money, backing out of this at a time when customer interest and activity in crypto is also down, right?
Right. Emily, I mean, what's next here?
I mean, I don't even know. Look, this guy is theoretically on the run. People thought that they saw him.
Oh, thank God it's less than 1% of their actual, like, investments. Good.
Legends online, but apparently he's playing a different video game right now to, like, clear his head. It really just seems like everything is going down in the worst possible way.
Like all of us, he's tweeting through it, right?
Yeah, he keeps tweeting through it, and it's like, where is he? What are you doing? Where's all of the money? And he has none of it now.
Right. He keeps apologizing on Twitter, keeps saying that they're going to get money, and yet they don't know where they're going to get money from. He owes all these people money. The entire crypto industry is very upset, and it's going to have like wider ramifications. This is an ongoing story. I mean, I don't know what happens next, but DOJ is allegedly looking into him. We've talked to a lot of people saying that, you know, there is going to be legal consequence here. So stay tuned as FTX turns.
I'm Michael.
So I was 24, I had a good job, I'd moved out, I was quite happy. And then what?
It is a strange thing, the memory. You try to gain experiences in life, and your memories is how you recall them. And to me, that's everything. But obviously you can survive without remembering, because Claire's does.
She was a shark smile in a yellow van. She came around and I stole the glance.
I have a page a day. I have to tick off when I've eaten. I tick off when I've showered because I don't remember. I somehow still learn piano, so when I've practiced I tick it off because I don't remember if I've done that.
Claire lives in a 3-minute period. That's her life, and it continues along in that 3 minutes. Have you ever seen the film 50 First Dates? When I watched that, well, it was quite emotional. It was very much like Claire.
To me it's random. It just goes.
What happened?
I thankfully don't remember.
I get a phone call, it said, you need to get here quick. Well, I've never driven so fast from here to Woolwich in my life.
Ooh, encephalitis.
Saw Claire and she was in an isolated room, but she was conscious and talking and sitting up in bed, and she kept looking at this calendar on the wall and saying, is it January? And we said yes. She said, well, what happened to Christmas?
I've been told, I think my flatmate couldn't wake me or something, and I ended up in hospital, and been told I didn't know who my parents were when I was in hospital.
That was the worst time of my life. I just couldn't believe she didn't know who I was.
Well, and I don't understand how I could forget them, but I didn't really know anything in hospital apparently. Took time.
do your count again. Your count down from 20. Let's see how well you can remember.
20, 19, 18, 17, 15, 11, 11,
Oh, 15, 11, she kept saying.
11, 5. What was it say?
5.
What did I say? I meant 15, 11. Wait, what was I saying?
That's horrifying.
That was the only thing I could think of asking her. I don't
This
know,
poor woman.
This one's got... After we've left hospital, the occupational therapist said that you actually need your short-term memory to get information into your long-term memory. Because Claire's is so small, she hasn't got enough to process anything. Even just lifting your arm and eating, you need that memory for that. So she can't get the information into her long-term memory because she hasn't got enough of it.
So it's 4 years worth? It's been about that long. I'll write down what I've done, because if I don't write that down, I won't remember a bit later on what I've done. And then if I need to do something, I've got a column, because I won't remember.
Happened to your brother-in-law after he OD'd on heroin? Ooh, sorry to hear about that. That sucks.
I need to do something, so I'll write it in there. I do remember thinking, what? This is just silly. Why do I want a diary? I think I used to be a bit embarrassed by it, but I don't know what I'd be without it now. It is my memory.
Claire needs to be repetitive. That's the only way she can learn. Harry, our dog, she just called him the dog for 2 months. It took her that long to remember the name Harry.
Yeah, stopping meds, I've got that in big at the top to remind me. After spending a long time trying to remember them, I then had to remember I didn't need to take them. I think when it was my birthday, it probably took a few weeks for me to remember I was 29. I say I've stopped aging now. So I'm happy with that. I don't want to get old, so I've stopped aging. I've got a diary and I have a whiteboard out. It tells me what I'm doing, so I can just think, oh.
It took her a long time to learn a routine, but now it's in her brain. That's it. It's got into the hard drive. And it doesn't flick off when she goes to sleep. Where are you taking to?
One of them's got the photos and names.
Oh.
Right, I'm ready. I forgot. What have I forgotten? I'll find out. When I meet new people, I think if I'm going to meet them again, I'll generally warn them I might not remember much. When I began to help out at the charity shop, I asked them for a photo, and I've got a page in my diary of photos and names underneath that I check.
She's been working here over 3 years now. I had to keep telling her over and over again in the beginning, but most of the time she gets it right now. Do you remember when you first came in, you couldn't find where to put your bag or your coat?
I don't remember that.
Yeah, it took about 6 months, but you managed it. Do you remember what my name is now?
Sue?
No, it begins with an R.
Rachel.
Correct.
Why did I say Sue?
Wicked.
I can recognise people, I can't do names.
Obviously, a father's dream is always thinking about taking your daughter down the aisle, and up until 2014, that was always what was going to happen.
I was seeing someone, I didn't remember them, so I've been told they were nice and tried, but I don't.
Oh my god, that's tragic.
Well, I'd love to think that Claire was going to meet someone again, but she won't remember she did meet somebody. It takes something very special, because it is hard work, without a doubt.
Elon's doing straight up Nazi dog whistles. Oh god, what is he saying now? Oh god, is Elon literally a Nazi? Fuck.
Someone I remember, be nice.
you feel sometimes, is it worth talking to her, because she's not going to know that you've said something. But it's silly, because in that 3 minutes she's a normal person understanding what you're saying. Good thing is, if I get a new joke, I do try it out on her every day, different ways, and I find out which one's the best way of saying it.
I often wondered if we took her somewhere and she went to the toilet, if a completely separate lot of people that she knows was to sit somewhere in the room, whether she would go and sit with them and not realise that it's the
different.
Yeah, it's a.
I don't know.
Might try it. You just go and sit down with them and shoot with them.
Good plus about bad memory. I have a bad day, I can forget. Don't write it down, I've forgotten. But it helps.
Claire's always happy. That's something I find very strange. I've never ever seen her upset since the injury at all.
I feel quite lucky now, I can't really complain.
She knows she's not right, there's something wrong, but she doesn't worry about it because it's 3 minutes later she's forgotten about worrying about it.
I think I'm getting along a lot better and finding it a bit easier and understand it a bit more, which definitely helps.
It's a
I'm
strange
good. How are
thing,
you, Kid Pyro?
memory. And when it goes, it goes.
That would be scary.
The opening day of the Ohio State
KBS 666 says Elon, the born rich white southern Afrikaner, is Nazi. I'm shocked.
State Fair would be marred by a fatal malfunction on the Fireball pendulum ride. 7 people were injured and 1 man was killed after 4 separate inspectors overlooked one massive flaw. This is the story of the Ohio State Fair tragedy. The Ohio State Fair is one of the best known
Roast corn!
longest running agricultural events.
I seriously love fair food so much. If you've never had like an actual fair deep fried Oreo, you're missing out. Or like a deep fried Twinkie. I had deep fried Reese's once. It was so good.
In the United States. Making its first appearance in 1850, the fair celebrates everything Ohio, from its farming and produce to its people and their accomplishments. While the early days saw it hosted everywhere from Cincinnati to Cleveland or Dayton to Mansfield, since 1886, however, the state fairgrounds in Columbus have become its permanent home. The Ohio State Fair takes place from late July through to early August and attracts up to 800,000 visitors over the course of 12 days. Visitors can enjoy everything from 70 or more rides, food stands and petting zoos, magicians and hypnotists, as well as sporting events and concerts.
Hey,
While
Jamie Lynn.
2015 saw a record 982,000 people, the Ohio State Fair of 2017, however, would make the national spotlight.
Is there a Michigan State Fair? Let me see. Michigan State Fair. Apparently there is. I've never been to it. Where does it normally... It's on Labor Day weekend? Where? Because I would like rides and also fried foods. What are we watching? Documentaries. Little short documentaries. The one we're currently on is about an accident with a fair ride.
For all the wrong reasons. On the 26th of July 2017, it was opening day for the Ohio State Fair, and more than 50,000 guests crammed the midway of the Ohio State Fairgrounds. One of the most popular rides at the fair that day was the Fireball, a swinging pendulum ride by Dutch manufacturer KMG.
I like pendulum rides, but the ones at fairgrounds scare me. Like if it's a big one at like a more established amusement park like Cedar Point or Michigan Adventure, basically if it's stationary, that's fine. But the ones that they pack up on trailers and ship all over the country for different fairs, those scare the shit out of me. Okie Dad, thanks for 6 months, says hi. Hello, how are you?
Owned and operated by traveling carnival company Amusements of America, the Fireball Afterburner first debuted in 1998. The ride comprises...
I think my favorite carnival ride is the Scrambler. I like the Scrambler. I like spinny things.
...of 4 large supports with a hub at the top. From the hub hangs a large swing arm with 6 shorter sweep arms and rotating gondolas attached. With a maximum capacity of 24 riders, made up of 4 on each arm, the ride reaches a maximum height of 65 feet, or roughly 20 meters, doing up to 15 revolutions per minute. Among the crowds at the fair that day were 18-year-old Tyler Jarrell and his girlfriend, 19-year-old Keziah Lewis. A recent graduate from Franklin Heights High, Tyler had enrolled in the Marine Corps just the week before. Staff Sergeant James Hopper of the Columbus Marine Corps Recruiting Station said, "Tyler was a highly motivated recruit. He wanted to serve and do something that would make a huge difference and impact on his life. He was a good kid, he was funny, and he was great to be around."
Citosaurus says, I got into a fight with a religious weirdo at the fair one year. They had one of those booths asking you if you thought you were a good person, Ray Comfort style, and I was in my edgy atheist days and had to start some shit. I also went on the Ring of Fire and almost barfed my brains out. Luckily, I waited till I got off the ride.
At around 7:20 p.m, Tyler and his girlfriend boarded one of the gondolas of the Fireball pendulum ride. Operating at the maximum capacity of 24 riders, once everyone was secured, the platform was lowered and the ride began to swing. As per normal, the claw started to rotate as the height and speed increased. However, in a moment caught on video, which due to YouTube policy I cannot show here, before reaching its maximum height, one of the sweep arms suddenly snapped, causing the gondola to detach. As the gondola crashed to the ground, despite locked restraints, Tyler and Keziah were both ejected from their seats. In the moments directly after the accident, the scene was horrific. Keziah and another rider were in critical condition, while 18-year-old Tyler Jarrell, thrown more than 50 feet after colliding with another gondola, would unfortunately die on the scene. In the immediate aftermath of the accident, all thrill rides at the fair were closed, and KMG issued a worldwide halt on the operation of all afterburners pending investigation. In the days that followed, KMG, the ride's manufacturer, and state officials conducted a thorough inspection of the ride. However, it would not be long before investigators would have their answers. A cursory glance inside the broken sweep arm revealed a disturbing amount of corrosion.
Oh my god, it just sheared itself off. It just straight up ripped off because of the, force of the... Oh my god.
In fact, the corrosion was so bad that, in some places, the steel on the sweep arm was little more than a millimeter thick. Furthermore, an inspection of the other 5 sweep arms revealed an equally disturbing picture.
Yeah, it could have done it to anyone. That was just the first one that broke, of course.
In light of these findings, the family of 18-year-old victim Tyler Jarrell filed a wrongful death lawsuit. Jarrell's father, Anthony Jarrell, told ABC News his son was loved and had a future. My question is, who is responsible for not doing their job of inspecting the rides? It was a great question. In the days leading up to the accident, the Ohio Department of Agriculture was responsible for inspecting all 72 rides at the fair. 4 different...
That's an interesting fun fact for people who aren't familiar with theme park stuff. theme park regulations are usually handled by a state's agricultural board, which, if you think about it, makes sense. A lot of rides and fairs kind of sprouted up around town and county fairs, which were, you know, farm communities coming together to do things. So the people responsible for regulating the rides and stuff ended up falling under the agriculture in a lot of states. It's interesting.
Different inspectors cleared the ride as safe.
Some bigger states have a separate thing, like ones with big theme parks. Florida, for instance, I think has a separate thing for that because they have Universal Studios and Disney, all their parks, and not to mention all the smaller things that are all around trying to siphon business.
However, the interior of the sweep arms were never checked. Furthermore, speculation spread that inspectors were under pressure to complete their checks after rain and flash flooding had delayed their inspections. Regardless though, Ohio state law granted immunity to ride inspectors from accusations of negligence.
What?
In a catch-22 situation, Amusements of America, the ride's owner, escaped penalty or blame because the ride had passed that inspection. Amusements of America.
So no one gets in trouble. We all just decided no one gets in trouble for this, even though it was probably preventable with very basic maintenance and due diligence on the part of the company.
America blamed KMG for poor design, which allowed rain to get inside the sweep arms. However, regardless of this, the Ohio State Fair sacked Amusements of America the following year. The final cause of the accident was excessive corrosion in the sweep arm that went unnoticed, leading to a catastrophic failure that left 7 people injured and 1 man dead. In light of these findings, KMG released a new sweep arm design. Perhaps the one silver lining in this whole story is that in 2019 a law was passed, Tyler's Law. Named in honor of the victim, it dramatically increases regulation around ride safety in Ohio. In 2018, the state of Ohio...
I wish regulations were proactive rather than reactive, but still, that's good.
The Ohio Exposition Commission and the victim's family would come to a $1.2 million settlement, with $870,000 to Tyler's family and the rest to legal fees and funeral expenses.
Okay, well, I guess they already have their own warning, so that'll probably do it. Chiba Hawk 420 thanks for 18 months, says the time has come. That's a sub baby. This sub baby's name is George Glass. First name bunch of numbers says yet another proof of the saying that regulations are written in blood. Indeed. This is about how do I put this? Let me make sure I can show this right. I'm just scrubbing through to make sure there's nothing that's TOS. No, it's all blurred out. This is about a certain segment of the manga market that is not moral, in my opinion. Let's put it that way. Disturbing images, probably sexualization of what appear to be anime. Appreciate the Bezos bucks.
Dollars in domestic and international sales.
For those who don't know, if you have Amazon Prime, you can connect it to your Twitch account and you get 1 free sub per month, which you could give to me. It's basically like forcing Jeff Bezos to give me money. So why not do it? It hurts him, it helps me. It's great.
With its
They're very clearly children, and it's just sort of out on display right here, and
tame compared to what's out there. Online and in bookshops, there's an entire subgenre of animated child pornography.
誰も、被害者がいないフィクションですから。
Oh boy. I think I've seen Sarah argue with this guy on Twitter.
狭い自分だけの空間でそれを楽しむのは、まあそれはちょっと許してほしいなっていう気はします。
Why is your private world pedophilic?
Shinji is an anime superfan and also one of the artists creating comics that show child pornography.
覚える人も多分中にはいると思うんですけど、自分はそれを一概に気持ち悪いからやめなさいとはできないし、私が不愉快に思うから法律でなんか裁くべきだ、法律を作るべきだっていう風にもならないんですよね。
Japanese lawmakers agree with artists like Shinji. In the US, just owning a magazine with animated child porn can get you up to 15 years in prison and label you a sex offender for life.
Is that true? I guess I didn't know that, because there are so many people on, like, Twitter who are Americans who very clearly, like, are into lolly or whatever the fuck. I guess I didn't realize it was still illegal in the United States, even though they, like, fucking talk about it all the time.
But not here. When child pornography was finally banned in Japan in 2014, publishers lobbied to keep animated child porn legal, arguing that artists' freedom of speech is
only a quarter into this. God. Jesus Christ. I didn't know it was gonna be that bad, guys. I apologize.
But with a wider... Addiction is the curse of the human condition. We seem to almost be pre-programmed to latch onto anything that makes us feel good. For many, our enjoyment of certain activities are manageable, but for others, it can lead to a downward spiral. Take work, for example. Many are able to leave their job at the door when it's time to clock off. But for others, one's career can become an obsession, where all they do and think of is their occupation. The daily cup of coffee may seem harmless, but the headaches and grumpy demeanour would beg to differ when you don't get your caffeine fix. Because we as a species are so susceptible to addiction, scientists have sought out to find out why. One such study towards the end of a very drug-influenced 1960s would seek out to find out why we seem to fall so hard when it comes to substance abuse. After all, we are faced very regularly with the risks of drug use and addiction, and yet so many don't heed the warnings. The experiment, rather than studying human addiction, would focus on the animal kingdom, and would make use of a bizarre contraption that allowed monkeys to self-administer highly addictive substances such as cocaine, amphetamines, and opiates. The experiment would result in terror for its subjects, where overdose, bodily disfigurement, and mental anguish were just some of the outcomes. But the results would only end up proving the obvious, that addictive drugs are addictive. And as such, the study would go down in infamy for its unethical use of its test subjects. My name is John, and today we're looking at the 1969 self-administration of psychoactive substances by monkey study, better known as the 1969 monkey drug trials.
The same year we went to the moon, some scientists were like, what if we gave heroin to monkeys and just let them keep taking heroin?
You're watching The Dark Side of Science. It is the 16th of June 1969, and
Okie Dad says, coked out chimps, what could possibly go wrong?
3 scientists release a controversial research paper. The trio have set out to delve into the darkest depths of addiction, but study rather proudly showcases a device that allows their animal test subject to self-administer drugs intravenously. But our story starts many years before the controversial study with the budding career of Maurice Sievers. Maurice Sievers was studying for his doctorate in pharmacology in 1928 under the tutelage of Arthur Laurie Tatum at the University of Chicago. During his time
Thanks for following,
there,
Not
his
Anonymous.
interest was sparked in the study of addiction and its psychological and physiological impact. His professor moved to the University of Wisconsin in late 1928, and Sievers would follow 2 years later after completing his PhD and MD. During his time with Tatum, the two studied opiates, cocaine, and novel barbiturate sedatives. During the late 1920s, Sievers would release several papers supporting a new theory of opiate addiction. His experiments to support his theory involved testing on dogs, cats, and monkeys to explore the phenomenon of psychological tolerance and how it
Thanks
is
for the link,
linked with
Gadri.
physical dependence. This theory was coined as dual action theory. Knowing that human addiction is linked to the high of the drug and the aversion from withdrawal, Sievers took on the suggestion from Harry Harlow that addiction in animals is a delayed condition response, where animals learn to associate the administering of the drug with positive sensations. Sievers combined Harlow's suggestion with his own theory of addiction, as euphoria from the drug combined with relief from withdrawal. In order to create addicts in his experiments, Sievers employed a 7-day dosage schedule, with only a large enough dose.
Okay, I understand that within science you want to be able to test things, but I feel like you can come up with a better test to discover, hey, do drug addicts and animals in general retreat from negative... Because withdrawal symptoms are clearly a negative. So of course animals are going to administer something to relieve their pain if they have it. Like if they're intelligent enough to form the association, of course they're going to do that.
To create a small reaction from the subject. The dose was incrementally increased, and it was found that after a month, noticeable behaviours were exhibited by the subject, such as excitement when it was injection time. The subjects would even show subdominant body languages towards the administrator. During this period of the 1930s, Sievers developed a scale to quantify the effects of withdrawal in his subjects, which by now included dogs, rats and monkeys. This included noting certain behavioural traits, such as clutching at the stomach and chasing the hand holding the hypodermic needle before administration. During the 1930s, the National Research Council set out to try and find a non-addictive morphine derivative, which pushed Sievers' studies into the forefront and also helped out with funding. But as the 1930s drew to an end, and the decade gave way to the 1940s, this search would be put on the back burner due to the Second World War, and as such, this affected Sievers. During the 1950s, Sievers' research was becoming less relevant, and as such, he sought out to revamp his experiments to try and simulate the more behaviour-driven model of addiction. Instead of a regimented single daily dose model, Sievers set out to mimic a more human form of dosage, for example, multiple doses in one day. He would also further modify his experiments to allow the animals to self-administer, and that leads us onto the infamous monkey drug trial. Sievers teamed up with another two scientists, Gerald Diano and Tomojo Yanagita, and planned the experiment to take place at Michigan University. The substances to be explored were morphine, codeine, cocaine, amphetamine, pentobarbital, ethanol, and caffeine. The experiment set out to explore drug addiction of non-physiological substances, i.e. drugs that don't give you a physical withdrawal but can cause psychological addiction. At the time, being able to model this type of addiction was difficult when working under Sievers' dual action theory of euphoria of the drug and fear of the pain of withdrawal. As drugs such as cocaine don't create a physiological addiction, but are very reinforcing in humans, leading to a psychological dependence. In order to test this, a method of self-administration was needed, and this had already been tested on rats in 1962 by a scientist called Weeks. Weeks had pioneered a method of conditioning rats to self-administer morphine with the use of a lever which delivered a dose intravenously to the animal. Interestingly, the animal would continue to self-administer the drug, maintaining a dependent state, similar to the way in which a human addict would do so. Another study in 1964 by Thompson and Schuster also employed intravenously delivered morphine, but in monkeys that had been restrained. This study set out to see the reinforcing capabilities of morphine versus food, but they didn't look to see if they could produce an addict from just a spontaneous lever pull. For Seaver's new study, this method would be used as a basis for a drug delivery in monkeys, but with a wider variety of drugs. Crucially, the new experiment would try and find if after the first injection of any drug by spontaneous lever press, would the participants continue to seek reinforcement by increasing the number of lever presses and maintain a pattern of self-administration over longer periods of time. Thus, if a continued behavioural pattern of self-administration was observed, then a psychological dependency could be demonstrated. Each monkey was housed in a small cubicle, 36 inches high, 30 inches wide and 26 inches deep. The floor had a mesh screen with a pan underneath that facilitated ease of cleaning, with it being flushed every 4 hours. There is also a panel with 2 switches mounted on the back wall of the cubicle. These were key to testing the animal's drug dependence.
Oh god, so it's like just locked in a box and all it can do is do drugs?
The first, when activated, administered a dose of the drug to the animal. The second made all the same sounds as the dose, but just re-delivered the drug back into the reservoir. This was to see if the monkey was seeking the drug or just playing with the switch. Both switches would be swapped around at random intervals. There was also a drinking fountain next to the switches for water, and thus most of the monkey's basic needs were met. The infusion machine could also be programmed to deliver a
The link explains they didn't have a choice. Okay.
dose, as well as a manually controlled on top of the operant control from the switch. The monkeys were intravenously connected to the drug infusion unit via a catheter, which terminated at the right atrium of the animal's heart. To hold the animal and catheter together, the monkeys were attached to a metal harness, which itself was attached to a restraining arm which allowed movement around the cubicle. 25 seconds was required to administer the drug, and another 25 seconds was needed to refill the syringe. This helped restrict the number of doses. The machine could administer a dose in 4 different ways. 1 by monkey alone, 2
Yeah, I'm not sure if I can watch a TED Talk.
by automatic timer, 3 by the timer if the monkey fails to press the lever within a predetermined time, and 4 by the monkey, with a timer blocking the circuit after injection, preventing the monkey from taking the next injection until predetermined time had elapsed. Each monkey was taken from a pre-established breeding colony at the university. The experimenters aimed for weights of subjects to be around 3.5 to 4 kilograms. The subject is placed in the harness and restraining arm, and on average an acclimation period of around 2 to 4 days was required for each monkey to get used to their new situation. Then the catheter was to be surgically implanted into the jugular vein under barbiturate anaesthesia. Post-surgery saline solution was injected into the catheter every 3 to 6 hours until the wound had healed. This roughly took 5 days, after which the subject was ready for experimentation. After fully recovered, the monkey is introduced to the switches in its cubicle. At this point, the active switch, that is the switch that can administer through the catheter, is only able to give a dose of saline solution. A signal light is placed above the switch to give a visual indication to the monkey that pressing the switch will result in a dose. For the next few days, a baseline is recorded of the amount of times the subject presses the switch for the saline dose. After the control period, the test drug was introduced for the first time. It was found that most subjects would either keep on pressing the switch for saline or after a few days lose the novelty interest. In the case of the former, the introduction of the test drug was pretty easy as the monkey would self-dose as it had done with the saline. However, the latter would require a little more incentive. This was a raisin taped to the switch. After the first dose of drug was received positively, then only 2 to 3 raisin incentives were needed to condition the subject to believable equals drug mechanism. As multiple monkeys were being employed for looking at various different drugs, understandably, not all responses to the drugs were positive. This is where the automatic dose function of the dose machine comes into play. If the monkey didn't take to the test drug initially, a potential dependence could be made by timed intervals of the drug administration. If the animal began to have a positive preference for the drug, then an increase in self-administration would be seen. However, if after 1 month the monkey still didn't show a preference for the drug, then it would be deemed that the animal hadn't developed a psychological dependence. Now the experiment was really multiple individual experiments with its own group of monkeys for each substance, and as such, the length of the study varied by drug. I'll go through each one in a different order to the 1969 research paper and instead of order of outcome for the participants, best to worst. Naloxone. This study lasted a month as none of the participants initiated self-administration, and after automatic doses ended, withdrawal only lasted around 2 days. Caffeine. 2 of the 4 monkeys failed to initiate self-administration of caffeine. 1 initiated and 1 failed to initiate self-administration, although priming with automatic injections caused the latter to begin self-administration. The pattern of self-administration of caffeine was in all cases sporadic and irregular, resulting in no deaths or noticeable withdrawal effects. Morphine. This experiment lasted a long time and was the substance the experimental team had the most experience with. 11 monkeys were used and 3 failed to self-administer, but after a little encouragement, all became drug dependent. During mechanical failures, the monkeys showed withdrawal symptoms and were observed rapidly pushing the lever, frantically trying to get another hit. This part of the study lasted 16 months, and apart from being morphine addicts and being dopey compared to their control counterparts, the general health of the participants was good. It was seen that for the first 7 to 8 weeks, the participants increased their dose, eventually evening out, although 1 increased the dosage for 30 weeks. No one died during this substance study. Amphetamines. All 5 of the monkeys initiated self-administration, and not long showed signs of hallucinations, plucking the fur off their arms, but none died. However, by the end of the study period, the participants were noticeably distressed. Cocaine. 4 monkeys were used to study the effects of cocaine. Initially, only half began to self-administer. They found that after 30 days, 1 of the monkeys had died of an overdose. In order to increase the length of the study, limits to amounts of cocaine was implemented. After the 30-day period, the monkeys began withdrawn, stopped eating and showed signs of hallucinations. Some bit off their fingers and scratched off their skin. They pressed both levers and were noticeably confused. Ethanol. 4 of the 5 monkeys in this experiment initiated self-administration, but for the first few months self-administration was interrupted by days of voluntary abstinence. These gaps would reduce as time went on, and the reactions from the animals was similar to what would be expected in a drunk human. Drowsiness, lack of spatial awareness, and tiredness. When withdrawal was tested, the animals became sick, experienced tremors, and even showed signs of hallucinations. 2 would die, but not from overdose, instead asphyxiation during their sleep from respiratory obstruction.
Oh, did they like swallow their own tongue or something?
Codeine.
Or vomit?
This involved 5 monkeys and only lasted for 8 weeks. 4 started self-administration, with only 1 needing to be initiated by the use of the automatic doses. The dose rate increased as each subject continued to self-administer, but after 6 weeks the first monkey died due to convulsions because of overdose, and by week 8 all of the others were dead, also from severe convulsions. Now the experiment highlighted some interesting results, because previous experiments had made use of psychologically dependent animals, i.e. they had been exposed to the substance via operant conditioning. The 1969 study, however, by using non-psychologically dependent animals who were naive to the effects of the drugs, showed that addiction in this case was chosen by the subjects to keep themselves under the influence, much like how humans can continue their dependency even after the face of negative ramifications such as familial, social and monetary problems stemming from their addiction, although a course of withdrawal also acts as punishment for not continuing to take the drug. What they also found was that not all monkeys began self-administration and needed the automatic doses to become hooked. This shows that some are more predetermined for addiction than others, much like in humans. By making use of cocaine and amphetamine in the study, it was shown that addiction is more likely caused by a psychological rather than physiological means, as both these substances don't create a physical dependence. Now these results are very interesting and help provide a greater illumination of drug addiction, but it was controversial, not in its results, but in its method. The experiment isn't cited in multiple most unethical studies lists for a reason. Now, I did mention Harry Harlow earlier in the video, and the criticism of this study and Harlow's work follow pretty much the same lines. That is the unethical use of animals, where they essentially were tortured and killed during the experiment through the creation of long-term drug exposure. Although the experiment hasn't had as much exposure as, say, the Pit of Despair and the Monkey Mother, the trauma inflicted on the animals is no lesser an affair. Seaver's career wouldn't be negatively affected by the study, and he would continue to use a similar setup to explore the link between nicotine and addiction.
Jeez.
The study has become one of the keystone cases in anti-animal testing movements, as the experiment seemingly ignores the Helsinki Declaration, where the welfare of animals used for research must be respected. This is especially saddening as the results were essentially, in its most simple term, drugs known to be addictive are actually addictive. I'm going to rate this subject around a 4 on my ethical scale. Do you agree? Let me know in the comments.
That seems a weird rating, but okay.
At around 8 PM on the 24th of November 2009, John Edward Jones, an avid amateur caver, entered the Nutty Putty Caves just south of Salt Lake City in Utah. He was accompanied by a large group of family and friends. It was, after all, just before Thanksgiving. The trip was intended to be a brief adventure that they could share before the holiday. What it turned into was a living nightmare that would cost John Edward Jones
I've never heard of this.
his life. The Nutty Putty Caves were first discovered in 1960 and were named for the soft brown clay which lined many of the passages. The system consisted of dozens of rooms connected by narrow, low-ceilinged corridors. Although it required a great deal of wriggling and crawling to navigate, it was considered a good cave system for beginners
Oh my,
and was visited
that's a good one for beginners? What's a hard one look like?
by thousands each year. Those visitors could enjoy features which included the Big Slide, a room wherein the floor descended at a 45-degree angle. There was also the Maze, a confusing jumble of tiny chambers and tight corridors that were fun to explore, and contained a hollow rock that was said to ring like a bell when struck. As supposedly beginner-friendly as the caves were, they weren't without issue. From 1999 to 2004, a number of people, including 2 Boy Scouts, became stuck in tight or narrow parts of the caves and had to be rescued by professionals. These incidents led to some changes in the way the cave was managed. After being gated for a number of years, the caves were reopened with a registration system in place. Groups would have to book online to ensure that cave management knew who was down there, and the caves wouldn't be overly crowded at any one point in time. That was the situation when John Edward Jones and his friends and family entered the Nutty Putty Caves on the 24th of November 2009. Amongst the group was John's brother, Josh. Between them, the 2 siblings had a great deal of caving experience. During their childhood, they had gone on numerous underground adventures across the state of Utah, although they had never before visited the Nutty Putty Caves. For almost an hour, the trip went well. The group crawled, scrambled, and inched their way through the caverns, delighted by each new discovery. At around 9 PM, John...
Yeah, I don't even necessarily, consider myself claustrophobic. But even I find this to be too much. This would make me uncomfortable.
found what he thought was the entrance to Birth Canal, a well-known stretch of the caves, so named because of how tight and narrow it was. The passageway which confronted John certainly fitted that description. He squeezed inside and wriggled forward. When the narrow crevice took a downward turn, he hesitated for only a moment. The narrow space looked as though it might open out a little bit further down, and besides, he was sure that he was in Birth Canal, a passage which he knew could be safely navigated if he just kept his nerve. Unfortunately, John wasn't in Birth Canal after all. Instead, he was wriggling headfirst down an uncharted tunnel in a different part of the caves, a tunnel that had never been charted specifically because it was far too small. Unaware of the danger, John crawled onwards until he couldn't. When he realised he was stuck, he was head down in an almost vertical passage, the diameter of which was smaller than a front-loading washing machine. He couldn't move an inch. John's brother Josh was close behind him and soon realised something was wrong. When he learned that John was stuck, he first attempted to pull him out, but was able only to shift him a few inches. Realising that the situation was beyond them, Josh raced back out of the caves to fetch help, while another friend waited by John's side. Within hours, rescue teams were on site. They were faced with an intensely difficult operation. It was now midnight, and pitch black outside the caves as well as in. The place where John was stuck was incredibly narrow, meaning that however many resources were available, only one person could get close enough to access him at any one time.
Yikes. Rageology says, "Hi Hannah, if you're taking video suggestions, this is a short architecture documentary on Nubia Way, the UK's first black housing cooperative built in the 1990s. Cool, thank you."
John remained as calm as was possible under the circumstances. Indeed, when the first rescue worker arrived on scene, he thanked them for coming and told them that he really, really wanted to get out. making that happen would prove to be next to impossible. Rescue workers attempted to drill out the rock around John, but were able only to widen one small part of the passage by a few inches, even after hours of labour. Abandoning this idea, they rigged up a system of ropes and pulleys. Securing a loop around John's legs, the only part of him that they could reach, they started the slow and painful process of hauling him out. At first, it seemed like this tactic might succeed. They were able to raise him a significant distance out of the vertical crevice in which he was stuck, although doing so caused John a great deal of pain. While they stopped to rest, a radio was lowered down to John so that he could communicate with his pregnant wife, who waited for him outside
Already in cult comics.
the caves.
I hope Clock Blockers Jr. goes well.
At this stage, John had been stuck in place for 19 hours, almost an entire
Oh,
day
boy.
spent upside down in a space so small that breathing was difficult. Being upside down for that length of time is not a trivial inconvenience. It causes blood to pool in the head, where it can rupture a blood vessel or put so much pressure on the eyes that it causes blindness. The organs lie heavily on top of the lungs, resulting in breathing difficulties and often unconsciousness. For some people, being suspended upside down for as little as 10 minutes can be fatal. John had been stuck that way for almost an entire day. Despite this, he remained quite calm. After several more pulls, he was high enough that he could make eye contact with one of the rescuers. When asked how he was faring, he said only, "It sucks. I'm upside down. I can't believe I'm upside down. My legs are killing me." At this stage, exhausted and in agony as John was, the possibility of escape must have seemed like a very real one. An escape from his confinement, medical attention, contact with his friends and family, all of these things were so close they must have been almost tangible to him. It was at this point that everything went wrong. As the rescuers hauled once more on the rope, something gave way explosively. The rescuer closest to John was hit in the face and briefly knocked unconscious. When he recovered, all he could see was dust and darkness.
Oh no.
It took several minutes for him to orient himself and work out the terrible truth. John had slipped right back down into the crevice from which they'd been hauling him. What had happened? A stone arch around which the rope had been looped had shattered, and the next nearest bolt had pulled out of the rock, creating slack in the rope and allowing John to fall. The bolt was what had hit the rescuer in the face and knocked him unconscious. The injured rescuer was evacuated from the cave for treatment, and a replacement wriggled into the narrow defile. They spoke to John, but could get no response, and could hear that his breathing was laboured and shallow. Desperate, they wriggled down into the narrow cave to try and loop another rope around his waist, but became stuck themselves and had to be helped back out. A doctor was escorted down into the caves to assess John as best he could. The news was the worst that there could possibly be. John had passed away. Despite a day-long rescue effort involving dozens of workers, the confinement and the inversion had taken its toll. He was declared dead at midnight on November 25th. His friends and family, needless to say, were devastated by the news. John was just 26 at the time, fit and healthy, and with a child on the way. His loss in a cave system considered relatively safe for beginners was a shock to everyone. It was quickly determined that any operation to retrieve his body would be impossibly difficult and dangerous. The landowner, appalled by the incident, initially wished to dynamite the caves, destroying them completely, but was dissuaded from doing so. Instead, the caves were sealed shut with a concrete plug, turning them into a tomb for John Edward Jones. A plaque was installed at the entrance to memorialise the final resting place of an exceptional young man, lost way before his time.
MH Darkbeast says, howdy Hannah, up for some cringe? I don't think we've seen this. Remember when Tate called Spider-Man a pussy and wanted a comic made with him beating him up? Little Leafy with 20 months says, remember chat, nothing good ever happens in caves. I've seen The Descent. You won't find me in one for real though. This story is so tragic and scary. It is. Alright, here's the Tate one. Somewhere in New York City. Pimp and hoes. Spider-Man, what the fuck? I came home and saw a fancy sports car in front of my house. When I went inside, some asshole named Tristan was banging my girl. You a punk-ass bitch. Crunch. You're pathetic. Get the fuck out of here. Tristan, I owe you a car. Oh my god. Well, there we go. That's unfortunate that someone decided to make that. Oh.
It was a real act of faith in the beginning to think that this muddy patch of ground would actually become the home that you'd hoped for.
Hi, my name's Errol. I joined the scheme in November. Looking to build a 2-bed house here.
Thanks, medicated person, for the link.
There was definitely a sense of pride about being part of something bigger than yourself.
And I like the idea of living with a bunch of black people as well.
It was a good feeling to know that it was all black people doing it.
There are tensions sometimes, but we all stick together.
Another night in security. This is my usual night, me and Errol.
Bye.
When I first came here, I didn't know we had to do security. I thought, what are you talking about? I'm going to be on Thursday on my own.
We actually built it from nothing. If you look at what black men and women have done here, you will see that you can do all sorts of extraordinary things. So it really was resisting.
The post-war experience of Caribbean migrants was overwhelmingly a negative one in too many respects. Having access to housing was always a huge problem. Council housing brought their own difficulties for black people. There was a sense that the real tenants were the people who were the locals, whereas the immigrants were people who were in a way intruding. I think this was exacerbated by the council, particularly if it's dominated by white councillors, refusing to acknowledge the role of racism.
First name Bunch of Numbers says, I love how British people use scheme as a regular synonym for plan. It makes all their plans sound hilariously sinister. And KBS says, I'm confused. This Spider-Man was beaten by Tate? That's not Snowflame, is it? And technically in the Tate comic, Spider-Man didn't have a symbiote
Other highly
suit.
specialized.
So, where was that?
Lewisham
like many other areas, has suffered from the process in which people are put second to economic forces. The rundown of employment, coupled with the disasters of high-density estates, all make fertile ground for racism, fascism, and the National Front.
We have thought about building things for ourselves and defining what it is that we want out of life in Britain. And house building is a particularly clear example of making real what it is we can achieve despite the odds.
Congratulations to Fusion's Jermaine to the first black self-build in London. Congratulations to your courage in actually taking on this high-risk thing of building a house. And I fully support and congratulate you on doing that. And if you'll excuse my pronunciation, big things are going. But with your help, bigger things are going.
It was probably about 1994 that I heard about Nubia Way and Fusion's Jermaine. And I did some research, found out
Sounds like Chet Hanks.
about Jose Espina, who was developing a self-built for rent model.
Experience in self-build came mainly from my work in Colombia. I saw in practice the work that communities, organized communities, could do in terms of contributing towards their own housing. So this is the model that we rolled out, initially with Fusion's Jermaine Housing Corp, an Afro-Caribbean cooperative formed in the north of Lewisham. The local authority was quite willing to offer sites from their land bank.
The Downham Estate was a huge cottage estate built by the London County Council in the late 1920s. This site where Nubia Way was created was a rather undefined area.
It was really difficult to see how else you'd get any sort of housing. The lure of building your own place was really strong.
Why would anybody want to do self-build? So you're giving your free labour for 2 years. You get three things from the reward. You get subsidised rent, lower than the normal social rent, so you get 30% of that for the whole of the tenancy. A second time, you get a lump sum on the point that you leave the tenancy. The third reward is that if you stay in the house, which most of us do and are very happy, then your children can inherit the discounted rent one time.
Everyone had to build together, so we started at number 13 and we would work our way down.
The first day I came here, I couldn't really see, visualise what this could become, you know. There's going to be a lot of work.
I'd never come across anything like that before, that organised, that ambitious.
It's like a jigsaw. Every section has a section and you tie the section in. And then basically the joists, your roof rafters, etc., that ties the whole of the house in. All I'm doing right now, as I say, is just setting out so that we keep the frames nice and straight, okay, and square initially, rather than having to guess it. It's all set out for us. It just makes life easier.
Walter Siegel was the architect that proposed self-build, and he said, we've got to design houses in such a way that the tenants can assemble them.
The Siegel system is about posts and beams. They are just timber frames that are bolted together on the ground and then lifted in place. The frames are raised up, and then we add all the joists, all the walls, the stud partitions, the roof, etc.
Lewisham had a lot of sites which were very difficult to build on conventionally, with conventional brick or concrete. And the great advantage of Walter Siegel's buildings, of course, is they're very lightweight. They can float on sites that are otherwise difficult to build on.
Walter's original buildings were very simple, very cheap, but not very well insulated. At Archetype, we did a number of these co-op schemes, and it became clear that as you increase the performance of the building, it becomes
I love the grass roof thing. That's just gorgeous.
And less economic to use that post and beam structure.
The thing about the design of the houses is the basic outer shell is kind of standard. But as you go in the houses, you realise things have been done differently. I've always got this phrase, you know, just sue me, you know. The architect came along one day and he said, "Where's the window for the den?" I said, "What window?" It's a special place, very special place. Because you can be outside and look up and you can remember nailing that bit up and you can remember sawing those bits there and all sorts of things, you know.
Building itself was hard, but not harsh. It was actually a very spiritual thing to do, I found, because you cut a bit of wood, it's going to be the main beam in the middle of your house or something, and you know, you can smell it, it's got a smell to it. And some of the stuff we used here, cherry oak, when you cut it, it smells of cherries. So you kind of got a real kind of intimate connection with building these houses.
There was acres of mud on the front and the back, and you'd come in the morning and you needed a certain tool, and you'd ask a few people, "Have you seen where of so-and-so?" They say, "Oh, down at 13, so you trudge down to 13. And when you get to there, "Oh, they've come up to number 1 now." So you trundle back to number 1 and they say they've gone to number 4 now, and this could go on for some time before you found the things you needed. Your boots would end up with kilos of cloying mud, you know.
Right, I'm gonna go soon, you know.
When my kids came on the site, I remember one time Kieran came on his own. He just loved it, see what Dad's doing.
They loved coming down here with their dad. A couple of times they had their little hard hats and they'd be running up and down.
There were days going back to self-build where we were frame lifting and a whole load of people from another project would come up and help us. It's an amazing feeling to sort of have these frames sitting on the floor and 2 hours later there's the shape of the house. That's a seminal moment, you know, really, you know, magnificent sort of days. They were really, really, really good days.
Okay, yeah, this is my house and it's getting on really well now. How come the red lights come back on again? It must have put, before was it?
We used to have to work 25 hours a week on site, and then we did an extra 16 hours security. When the scheme was started, there weren't enough people. They hadn't recruited a full group. We went down to 6 people for a long while. I think it was about a year.
When we started, I would think 2/3 of us were working.
Here's a link
2 years
to
in,
the
I don't think anybody was.
vid,
They just
if you were
couldn't do
asking
it.
What it's called. It's called
It said
Newbie
that
Away, a
it
story of
takes
black-led
twice as long for
self-building in
self-build to build a house
Lewisham.
compared with a professional builder, but it took them something like 4 times as long.
That was 2.5 years of hard graft.
When I first came on, it was just black guys. It was black guys. I think there might have been a couple of women who seemed to like the kind of physical aspect of the work.
I mostly worked with the women. We could just get on with really well. So there's about 4 women here, and I used to work with them all the time. I used to really enjoy that.
It was Andrea, it was Kathy, it was Lorraine and myself.
If it wasn't for the women that were involved, the scheme may not have worked. It may have split apart.
Lewisham.
Yeah, I'd say I've learned a lot. I mean, things that I wouldn't have been able to do if I hadn't been on this scheme. I won't actually appreciate it till I've moved in and I can just look round and say, oh yeah, I've done this.
Had you experience before?
None whatsoever.
So you came here?
A novice.
A novice?
Yeah.
When we first of all joined it, there was nothing around supporting the group, around conflict management.
I suppose anybody that's done this sort of thing before might have some expectation that some team support might be required.
When I was paying chair of the Housing Committee at Lewisham, I already knew that the Downham estate, there were some difficulties. A lot of the families at the top of our housing list on grounds of need came from Afro-Caribbean background, some has an African background. We were finding that people who were offered houses on the Downham estate were actually turning down these offers. Clearly they felt it was a hostile environment. The fact is, when they went to visit, they could already see the curtains twitching in the...
I appreciate it, Forced Espion. I don't know if I could ever watch that, because it's like a full theatrical, or at least full streaming release. It's not just like all up on YouTube, not at least without paying for it, I don't think.
In the houses round about, and people saying, who are these people who are coming to live here? We had to cut through all that. We had to challenge it.
It wasn't necessarily articulated, but it was definitely there. This was an NF area, and they made it clear that they didn't want us here.
One day, I was on the site on my own, and 2 guys...
Oh, if it's on Amazon Prime, we could watch it. as a prime watch party. I guess that's true.
Came on and one had a can of petrol, another had a chain. I pretended there were other people on site, so I just shouted out, go and call the police, and I walked directly towards them to challenge them, we were going to go for a fight. Fortunately, turned around and walked away, and then I followed them off the site.
It only became more important that we did our own security.
Hey. No, man. This is spooky. I could almost see the actual moon.
One person had to stay every night to do security, and it was a very unpleasant job because there was no lighting on the site at that time at all, and you were in really old, mouldy caravan.
It's my yard in the night time.
And I remember the first night being here, you're apprehensive all night. I don't think you even slept properly. We actually decided to double up in the actual security, and me and Errol, we would do it on a Thursday, I think it was.
I tell you, it's really cold tonight. Just about a few minutes ago, the wind was actually blowing the caravan.
Well, it's nice doing it as a pair, actually.
You don't have to sort of be on your own, just thinking C18 or NF's gonna come and burn the place down. You feel a bit more in control.
We used to sleep in the knowledge that if they throw a petrol bomb against this caravan, we won't get out.
KBS says Lewisham is where the National Front was beaten by the left in the mid-70s. It was a riot battle on the high road. The cops thought the National Front was going to win and stood aside, and National Front got their asses kicked. Nice.
Here's something. You feel much more confident that you could go and check it out.
Thanks, Cruelty One. That sounds interesting.
Well, I'm gonna pray about that.
It seemed like it was funny, but it wasn't funny to me. I think I was trying to be the brave one.
That it draws things out of you that may not have come out of you, that go beyond sort of pride, to actually survival.
I came down one morning and I could smell burning. And as I got about halfway down, they said, number whatever's 12, I think it was, has been burnt down. And I walked down and saw the horror of it all.
Lost a whole house, and then half of this house and half of number 11 as well was gone.
Burnt for 7 hours and the frame was still there, solid. It took some professionals with chainsaws to get it down.
I remember at one stage, my son's mum said to me she wasn't sure she wanted him to stay here because of what was going on, or what was,
Some people just left immediately, said, what kind of area is this, and things like that. Not the living daylights out of the co-op. And maybe we never did recover, I think, in a way.
Some of us wondered whether we'd ever finish, or whether we'd want to even be here, or be able to stay here. Some of that could have been predicted. If you plonk an all-black Salford in the middle of an NF area, what do you think's going to happen? There's going to be some bad stuff happen.
My parents moved in before I was born, in 2003, I believe. The first time my friends came around was in year 5, a little birthday party. But even before they came in, they just saw the house thinking, wow, it's completely unique. Where else do you get, a road like this? It's kind of rare, this open community.
Dolly lives in about the middle of the road, and a couple of times she's made a curry for every single house and just knocked on the door and give us a fresh curry, which is like, where does that happen?
The neighbors we're like family. The support they showed me and Mikhail, it's like you don't even get this from your family.
Unfortunately, there's been a failure in the long-term maintenance of the houses. Their approach was to kind of blame the self-builds for that.
It's far easier for them to scapegoat the visible minorities than to deal with what the working class deserve and should have.
I have no doubt about what the original agreements were, that share would be in perpetuity with self-builders. That's the agreement that was made with them.
If the one thing we could change in London or anywhere is have strong communities and people come together to get things done, there's a power in that. There's an enormous power in that, you know.
What it really means to me is community, especially for the boys, the hard work and graft. They lived it. They've seen how hard we've worked.
That's it. Kieran, look around.
The thing that makes me happiest is that my neighbours in the street, we greet each other, and people are participants in the process of creation of a great community.
That people had actually managed to recreate something that was deep down in their soul, really, as the housing should be.
I think it was important that it was a black cooperative because it was an example of something which defied a lot of the limiting beliefs about black people that were around at the time. It came about near the end of the build, and we had to decide what name we wanted. We had been reminded of our blackness in some not very nice ways. So there were two contingents. There was the defiant contingent that wanted to call it Black Man Way and stuff like that. And then there was another contingent that wanted to call it the Oaklands. We were determined that we weren't going to be called Oaky Pines or something. So Nubia Way was hit on as a sort of compromise. It was coded for the stupid people who wouldn't understand what it meant, but those in the know would get it.
I think Desmond Tutu says about Ubuntu that I and we're greater together, because we're not only creating a community, but we ourselves are growing through that process of the challenges of the group and so on.
You've got something beautiful that was built out of a lot of ugliness that was around. Our stories are part of Nubia Way. It's not just the building. Not just the buildings, it's Nubia Way is the whole thing.
That was a really cool one. That was nice, especially because we watched so many dark ones in a row. Drop the mic with 12 months. Happy anniversary. Yay. MH Dark Beast says, here's a fun cleanse from the void.
Be gone, demon! Inventor and master of all deceit, the power of Christ compels you! Save it, demon, or should I say, Satan in my cat's body. I've been watching you. Disrespecting God, shapeshifting, profanity, connecting to the dark web, sacrifices, attempts at homicide. And last night, you attended the cult meeting at the end of the cul-de-sac. What do you have to say for yourself? That's exactly what Satan would say. I knew it! Hey, Lucy! Bad cat. Lucy! Aww! Dang! Those hairballs. They really bring out the worst in you.
That's cute. Yeah, I've seen this before, but I want to show you guys because it's nuts. This is one of the worst things ever.
The Japanese are known for their extreme game shows, many of which have put their contestants in physical and psychological danger to provide their audiences with a unique viewing experience. In the late 90s, early 2000s, a broadcast that many believe to be the most radical and potentially unethical instance of this aired on a Tokyo-based network called Nippon Television. The show was titled Susunu Denpa Shonen, and it consisted of a live stream of a single room. Inside the room was a stack of envelopes, a rack of magazines, water, a gas burner, and one man who was asked to undergo one of the most rigorous endurance performances ever broadcast. That man was a struggling comedian desperate for fame who went by the name Nasubi.
Yep, this is about the
In
live stream
January
guy.
of 1998, Nasubi, which translates in English to eggplant, was chosen from a raffle of approximately 20 applicants for a contest titled A Life of Prizes. After winning, Nasubi was escorted to a space no bigger than a small studio apartment. He was asked to begin the game with absolutely nothing, including his clothes. He was given only water, and in order to provide himself with food, clothing, or any means of entertainment during his stay in the room, Nasubi must win them via sweepstakes. The sweepstakes could be found in the stacks of magazines, which he could enter by mailing contest applications using the envelopes provided. This was the point of the game, to survive solely on his contest prizes. Once Nasubi's winnings reached a monetary value of 1 million yen, or roughly $9,000 US, he was declared the winner and allowed to exit the room, resume his life, and enjoy his newfound celebrity. So, did Nasubi succeed? That all depends on how you define success. To answer this question, let's take an in-depth look at Nasubi's time inside the room. Immediately upon being left alone, Nasubi's priority was to cover himself, and the very first contest he applied for during this first episode of the live stream was an apron. Not only did he not win the apron, but during his entire 15-month-long stay, Nasubi remained completely nude. The majority of his time was spent submitting contest applications. In the first month, Nasubi applied to 5,748 sweepstakes. While waiting for notifications of his first winnings, Nasubi was taunted by ill fortune. He answered the phone to misdialed callers, and during one frustrating afternoon, after several days without food, a ramen delivery boy knocked on Nasubi's door by mistake. But after many days of waiting, becoming desperately hungry, Nasubi finally won his first prize, 12 pots of fiber jelly, which he immediately began eating. His second prize was 5 kilograms of rice. Unfortunately, he quickly realized he didn't have a pot to cook it in. After failing to eat the rice raw, Nasubi discovered he could cook the rice in an empty fiber jelly container by setting them close to the stove burner. For the month of February, Nasubi continued to win the following: 1,000 yen, body soap, canned spaghetti, subsequently realizing he didn't have a can opener for the meat sauce. Despite many prizes having little or no practical value, Nasubi seemed grateful for everyone he received, And it's no doubt that with an entire waking life consisting of little more than filling out contest applications, the brief adrenaline rush of the knock at the door became his only source of excitement. Nasubi's basic needs of course had to be met, so food was of paramount importance, although let's remember that the higher the monetary value of the prize, the closer Nasubi was to his 1 million yen goal. Reaching this goal proved incredibly time-consuming. To get halfway there, it took Nasubi 6 months and 38,000 contest entries. During this time, some notable prizes included a bicycle, which once the initial excitement wore off, he remembered had no practical value in his tiny room. He rode it around briefly, then never again on the live stream. Panties, which was his first article of clothing, although they didn't fit. A stuffed seal, which he named Binasu, befriending it. A 14-inch TV set, although there was no antenna or cable, so all he could view was static. A toothbrush and toothpaste, which allowed him to brush his teeth for the first time during his 3-month stay. Around the 6-month mark, the show had become incredibly popular, and the local news media somehow discovered where Nasubi's secluded room was located. So, producers woke Nasubi in the middle of the night, blindfolded him, and escorted him to a new, yet nearly identical room. Before this moment, A Life of Prizes was broadcast on Sunday nights and edited down to a 10-minute weekly summary. But with this room switch, producers decided to offer a live web stream alternative, causing them to digitally follow Nasubi around with a joystick in order to censor his genitalia. As you can see, the quality of the live stream is primitive, but keep in mind this is in the late 90s. It took Nasubi another 3 months to get 2/3 of the way to his 1 million yen goal, and throughout the months of August, September, and October, Nasubi submitted an additional 17,000 contest entries. Notable winnings included a watermelon, tickets to see Spice Girls the movie, a VHS player to go with the TV set he had won several months back. After this expensive win, Nasubi hit a string of bad luck. At one point, he went a week without hearing a knock at the door. And during one drastic period, Nasubi completely ran out of food. Rather than rescuing him and risk spoiling the tension of the show, producers opted to relocate Nasubi a second time in hopes that the change would...
Isn't this just Twitch? True. KF Logan, thanks for rating. Can we get a shout out for KF Logan? How was your stream? I hope it went well. Today we're watching a bunch of mini documentaries, so we're just watching, each one's about 10 minutes on average. Some are a little shorter, some are a little longer. So this one so far is about a Japanese game show where a man was locked up for a long period of time and had to survive on only sweepstakes winnings that he filled out from magazines. I'm Hannah. Give me a follow if you'd like. I'm a leftist streamer. I cover all sorts of stuff. Lots of weird internet communities and just weird content in general. I debunk conspiracy theories. We look at the sovereign citizen movement. We do all sorts of fun stuff.
Bring about good luck.
Yeah, you can have a link. Here you go.
This new location did indeed prove...
Hannah, are you locked someplace? Yes, I can only be set free once someone buys the 10 millionth gift sub on my channel. One day I'll be free.
Prove lucky, as Nasubi won several very valuable prizes, including a PlayStation, which he played non-stop for 4 days straight, but he soon banned himself from it after recognizing it as a distraction from filling out contest entries. a tent which he lived in for several days, but whose sheer size prevented him from doing his dance of gratitude during his winning moments. Worried he would appear ungrateful, Nasubi disassembled his tent and put it away. In the month of December, Nasubi won a very expensive set of automobile tires, a 10,000 yen gift voucher, and finally, putting him just over his 1 million yen goal, a small bag of rice. And after 335 straight days of nothing but sleeping, eating food when available, eating dog food when there was nothing edible available, answering the door, and most importantly, filling out contest entries, Nasubi had finally won. Or had he? At this point, the ratings of the show hovered somewhere around 17 million Japanese viewers. For comparison, the highest watched episode of Game of Thrones sits at 16.5 million viewers. The people absolutely loved it, and the producers were making millions. The notion of ending it just yet was ridiculous. So, in the middle of the night, the producers woke Nasubi, showered him with confetti and streamers, and announced that he had finally won the contest. They returned his clothes, but Nasubi hadn't worn clothes in almost a year, and upon dressing, he'd realized he'd developed a distaste for them, citing them as being itchy. Although Nasubi was under the impression that the show was over and his trip to a Korean carnival was a celebratory holiday for his hard work, little did he know that the producers had no intention of allowing him to go home yet. While still in Korea, Nasubi was blindfolded once again and guided to a fourth room, which consisted of the familiar magazine rack, stack of envelopes, and a Korean-Japanese dictionary. Despite not knowing the language, Nasubi was nevertheless instructed to put his Korean-Japanese dictionary to work applying for contests. His new goal was to earn enough prizes to equate the price of a plane ticket back home to Tokyo. It needed only be a one-way economy class ticket. After translating and applying to nearly 7,000 contests, Nasubi met his monetary goal in just 2 short months. But
just 2 months. It just took 2 months of translating magazine sweepstakes and applying to them every day, every minute.
Producers required him to make another 9,000 yen in order to upgrade his ticket to business class. And Nasubi accomplished this by winning 2 bags of incredibly rare and expensive tea leaves. But this wasn't good enough for the producers, and so they then required him to upgrade his tickets to first class. No problem for Nasubi, who had institutionalized himself to this way of life, and after winning a picture frame, a fox skin, and a live octopus, Nasubi was a first-class passenger. It was finally over for Nasubi. He'd won. Producers blindfolded him and led him into his final room. Unbeknownst to Nasubi, the 4 walls of this room were collapsible, and behind them sat a live studio audience. As soon as Nasubi was left alone in his final room, habit kicked in, and he quickly undressed. After a dramatic countdown, the walls collapsed and Nasubi was met with the cheering applause of thousands of people. The look of shock on his face was both cathartic and sad to watch. At this point, Nasubi had been living this lifestyle for 15 months, having barely spoken to another human being. He applied to 75,000 magazine contests, averaging 1,250 applications per week and nearly 200 applications per day. It took him several minutes to register what was happening. It's difficult to imagine the thoughts that must have been going through his mind in these moments. The show, Susunu Denpa Shonen, was intended to be comedic, featuring a laugh track to punctuate almost every moment featured in their broadcast. Even during the moments where Nasubi became visibly distraught, frustrated, and hopeless, the live stream would overlay silly sound effects to signal the viewer that his suffering is their entertainment, escorting them away from the intuitive response of pity.
Oh my god.
Susumu Denpa Shonen went on to film 3 more endurance experiments before being cancelled in 2002 due to the torturous nature of their content. Some of the other contests included requiring contestants to hitchhike across Africa, build a raft on a deserted island and float back to Tokyo, and finally, sit in a pitch-black room only to receive light and food whenever their favorite baseball team won a game. Although the show was cancelled, it found a new home in 2009 on the internet under the name Number 2 Nihon Webcast. But when I went to the site for this, it appeared to be down, so I can only assume this too was ultimately cancelled. Even though most people outside of Japan aren't familiar with Nasubi or the Susumu livestream, Japan's reputation for their cruel reality television is widely acknowledged, and it has been often parodied in Western media. So the question many of you may have now is, what happened to Nasubi? Did he achieve the fame and fortune he was promised for his remarkable endurance? Well, yes and no. His journal of experiences, titled Nasubi's Prize Contest Life Diary, went on to be published and reached bestseller status. And despite not becoming the world-famous comedian he'd hoped to become, he did find small success in television and film acting. But it's undeniable the psychological toll the livestream had on Nasubi. Because he spent 15 months entirely naked, Nasubi reported having trouble wearing clothes after returning home, and his extended solitude caused his social skills to atrophy, and he found much of his comedic charm and social aptitude gone, leaving him awkward and shy. Even though Nasubi's exploits remain one of the most watched live streams in the history of Japan, this in-depth look into the brutal 15 months this man endured in order to provide us with an unprecedented viewing experience begs the question: how far should we go to entertain?
Yikes. Forrest Espion says, Hannah, thoughts? Comedians tend to be very extrovertive, social butterfly type people. How did he not go crazy? Even normal people or hardcore introverts would lose it in just a few weeks, like during 2020 in the USA. A lot of people went to hospitals for panic attacks during just our first 3 to 4 week lockdowns here in California. I don't know. I really don't. Hopefully the whole show was just a lie, but I don't think it was, because it was live streamed after a certain point, so I don't know. Just really, really bad.
Now I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, you're the British Museum. Why have you got modern stuff like this in your collection? What's going on? You've got some attitude. Hello there, my name's Henry Flynn, and I'm one of the curators here in the Department of Coins and Medals at the British Museum. And welcome to my corner. Right then, check these out. What I've got here are 2 objects which might be a bit surprising to you. Maybe objects that you think are a bit unusual, things that you might normally expect to find here in the British Museum. These are actually 2 prop banknotes from an episode of the TV series Doctor Who. They were from the 2006 Christmas special, which was called The Runaway Bride, and the episode in question required a large number of banknotes to billow out of a cash machine in large numbers. We actually have this example of the banknote on display in the Money Gallery here at the British Museum, and there's a little video screen next to it which has the scene in question on a sort of 30-second loop. Just to explain the context of this, in the 2006 Christmas special, TV's Doctor Who, the Doctor if you prefer, he has just met his new friend Donna Noble, played by Catherine Tate. She's been mysteriously teleported from her wedding to the Doctor's TARDIS. She doesn't know why, he doesn't know either. He's trying to get her to her wedding on time. Gets it wrong, of course, the TARDIS is playing up, so they get to this sort of London street. Catherine Tate's character has pretty much lost patience with Doctor Who by this point. She goes off to sort of do her own thing. He, trying to be helpful, goes over to a cash point, zaps the cash machine, and takes some money, basically, for her taxi. By which point, she's taken matters into her own hands. She's hailed a cab, she's borrowed some money off a kind member of the public, a passerby on the street.
Von Tuck says that Japanese comedian never really recovered. He remains socially awkward to this day. Depressing.
And she's got into the cab. But what she hasn't noticed, which the Doctor clocks quite quickly, is that the taxi is being driven by a robot Santa. Now, this is the kind of thing that happens to me all the time at Christmas. I'm sure it does to you as well. And realising that she's in danger, he needs to catch up with her. So he turns around, but sees that there's another group of robot Santas, obviously, sort of creeping up on him in the street. So needing to create a distraction quite quickly, this is what he does. He zaps the sonic screwdriver at the cash point again, causing a huge amount of banknotes to billow out into the street. And of course, members of the public doing what they most likely probably would do in that situation, just start grabbing them. The robots are distracted, and the Doctor is able to make his escape and then go and help his friend. For copyright reasons, as you can imagine, it would be so prohibitively expensive to feature that clip in this video, which is just not something that we could even consider, really. You can come see it for free. It's on display in the Money Gallery if you want to come see that. You might already be familiar with the episode. But although it would have been really nice to feature it, it's just, you know, not practical, but it's a shame. Tell you what, come with me.
Excuse me, I'm begging you, I'm getting married, I really am, and I'm late, and I just need to borrow a tenner, and I'll pay you back, I promise, and it's Christmas. Taxi! Thanks for nothing, spaceman! I'll see you in court! Donna!
Did he skip Matt Smith? Did I miss that one?
Right then, where were we?
This just feels like an excuse for him to cosplay. I think he just wanted to show his cosplays on the internet.
They're interesting. They tell two interesting stories, really. They're interesting from the narrative point of view, their use in the actual episode. It reveals interesting things about the character of the Doctor. The Doctor is portrayed as someone who is very moral, always takes the moral high ground, is always in the right. Occasionally, the scriptwriters try to put elements of darkness into the Doctor's character, but for the most part, she, of course, for the most part, the character is a bit of a goody-goody. So what's interesting in this episode is he basically robs a bank without a second thought, doesn't care. I mean, he sees that he's taking the high ground, I guess. He sees that he's doing the right thing by helping his friend. Money is not of interest to him. But by zapping the sonic screwdriver at the cash machine and stealing a huge amount of money, that's a crime from our point of view. But to him, he's not bothered. So it reveals an interesting lack of sort of consideration for our way of life, I guess. What's really interesting about these particular objects is the story behind their creation. The Bank of England, they're a little bit funny about the recreation of banknotes in TV and film productions, as you can understand. That's counterfeiting, which is illegal. However, that presented the Doctor Who production team with a little bit of a problem. They needed to have a huge amount of money blowing around in the air for the hired extras to grab at. You can't do that with real money for obvious reasons. All you can do in that situation is recreate, make your own, copies. The Bank of England guidelines for this sort of thing are quite strict, and they state that you can make replica banknotes, but one side of them has to be blank. So it's absolutely clear that the replica is indeed a replica, could never be confused for the real thing. But with so many needed to be shown on screen in an uncoordinated, sort of chaotic scene where they're billowing around in the air, it would be very clear to the public, the viewing public, that they were fake. So that was also not an option for the Doctor Who production team. And what they chose to do was make their own, which I think is great. It's a really nice thing to do. Now, I'm going to glove up. These are modern objects, they're TV film props, but we still treat them with the same care and respect as we would an ancient coin. Anything else that we've got in our collection is treated with the same respect once it becomes an object. I know you all liked my sinister blue gloves last time, so I'm up in the ante by wearing some black ones today. This is good TV, isn't it? Right, there we go. What's really nice about these objects, the thing that I really like about them, is it's just so clear that they were a labour of love on behalf of the art department at BBC Wales who made them. They got their concept artist, Peter McKinstry, to design Doctor Who banknotes. They didn't have to do that. That's the great thing about it. I think you could have easily, it doesn't need to look like this. They could have done something much more simple, something that would have taken a lot less time to do. I mean, you can barely see them on screen. They appear for such a split second. You would never see all these little extra details, these little extra Easter eggs for you to enjoy. So it's worth me, I think, explaining them to you, going through them with you a little bit. So first and foremost, obviously, instead of a portrait of the Queen here, we've got a portrait of David Tennant. Apparently these took about a day to produce, and the bulk of the time was taken by Peter McKinstry on drawing the portraits. Nice little likeness there of David Tennant, who of course plays the Doctor in this episode. It's got DT there, David Tennant, for him. Instead of a hologram, little image of the TARDIS there, the little police box, which is a nice touch. It says London Credit Bank at the top there. The London Credit Bank is a fictional bank that was created for the programme. Other nice little details to mention are the copyrighted BBC Wales logo at the bottom there. And the designer's name, Peter McKinstry, which quite nicely, he's there credited as being the chief numpty, so it's a nice, a nice little touch to add. And the other thing to mention, I think, which again you would never see this on screen, even if you pause it and zoomed in, it'd be very, very difficult to see. There's this little quotation here. What the quotation says is, "No second chances, I'm that sort of man." That's, as I'm sure you know, I don't need to tell you these things, that's a direct reference to David Tennant's very first episode.
Oh yeah, this guy's
also
a huge
Christmas
nerd.
The Christmas special in 2005.
Love this guy.
The other thing to sort of note, which again is a reference to that episode that he debuted in, is Ten Satsumas here. So they're all very specific to his Doctor. And like I say, just nice to have those extra elements added in there. Now, these are, of course, based on the older banknotes that we used to have in the UK. They've since been replaced, the paper money that we used to have has been replaced by polymer notes. So if the production team was doing something similar today, they'd have to start from scratch and do something completely different. These are based on the old paper notes, but the paper itself is very smooth and shiny. It's, even to the touch, even through my gloves, you know, through my sinister black latex gloves, it's clear that this is not real money. And just to demonstrate that, you can see this is the obverse, if you want to call it that, if you want to get technical. The reverse is identical. Now, if you come into the British Museum and come to the Money Gallery and have a look at this banknote on display, do please have a look at the objects it's displayed with. It's displayed beneath a prop banknote from the movie GoldenEye, the James Bond movie GoldenEye from 1995. Compare the two. That's a prop banknote used for exact same purposes. Money that needs to be apparently real on screen, but in reality is fake. If you look at it, you think, yeah, clearly fake. It's very functional. It's a sort of blank bit of paper with some green elements on. Very basic. Nowhere near to the level of this detail. So it just shows you the level of love and care and attention that the people who make that show really put into it, which I think is quite nice.
Logarth says those are clearly nitrile gloves, sir.
If an underground organism of unfathomable size were unearthed in the United States, you might expect widespread panic at the horrifying discovery, or expect the US government to block off the cosmic terror from civilians. You might not expect the entity to be turned into a theme park marketed towards all ages. But that's what happened with the thankfully fictional Mystery Flesh Pit National Park. The name given to a creature of indeterminate size and origin that was nonetheless turned into a tourist attraction. Mystery Flesh Pit is an ongoing multimedia narrative project by creator Trevor Roberts, who you can follow and support in the links below. The story of the pit is told through flyers, advertisements, and posters that rebrand the horrifying life form as a relaxing family getaway. And it's this upbeat language around something so blatantly terrifying that makes the Mystery Flesh Pit project so amusing and so unsettling. Just the sort of thing to cover at this spooky time of year. But since venturing into the darkness of an unknown organism is a little frightening to do on one's own, Edge will be joining me for this entry. He makes great content about prehistoric life, unique modern animals, and bizarre cryptids, so he's just the person to help investigate this mysterious organism. Now let's begin our descent.
Unearthed accidentally in the early 1970s, the Mystery Flesh Pit, also known as the Permian Basin superorganism, is located in West Texas.
MH Darkbeast says, so Hannah, did you and Baja watch the Guardians of the Galaxy holiday special yet? If so, I'd love to hear your thoughts. I think it was the best Disney Plus show yet. Haven't seen it yet. Have not seen it yet. We've been watching the Disney Plus Santa Claus's show, and it's been terrible. It makes me mad. Not real mad, mind you, you know. Fake frustrated at a TV show mad.
Discovered by oil workers, the first tours of the pit were given by James Jackson, a small-time oil man and showman. The Mystery Flesh Pit was then further studied and reinforced by Anodyne Inc., a deep mining corporation who opened the park as a tourist attraction in 1976, with assurances it was perfectly safe. We know how corporations are. In selling the park to the public, Anodyne downplayed the horrifying nature of the pit itself, creating a friendly cartoon mascot, Caver Coop, who assured families the pit was nothing to be afraid of. The attraction was later absorbed into the national park system in the early 1980s, which led to the Permian Basin superorganism becoming further normalized. Surprising absolutely no one, thousands of tourists regularly exploring the inside of an unknown organism would eventually prove to be a bad idea, as the infamous 2007 disaster would prove. But that's a story we'll get to later.
For now, let's try to piece together the material the author has given us to try and understand the pit's biology. Like so many aspects of the pit, the more visceral reality of the organism was glossed over with clinical language by the professionals who first studied it. Since an organism of this size defied conventional science, numerous new disciplines were founded to help understand it. Geobiology is the term used for how the organism interacts with its environment.
Ew.
Looking at this early map, you can see the life form possesses musculoskeletal, nervous, limbic, and vascular systems similar to traditional life, at least on the top layers. This cross-section of the pit, however, might just be a small fragment of a larger, more complex organism. How large? Data collected from a series of boreholes shown in this diagram suggests that in some places the organism extends over 30 kilometers below the Earth's surface. For reference, the Marianas Trench is only 11 kilometers deep. Indeed, the author suggests that the pit may well extend into the Earth's mantle, with some of the imaginary scientists implying that the organism may be native to the interior of the planet, having merely surfaced to the upper tectonic plates for unknown reasons. And despite public assurances to the contrary, there's evidence that people working behind the scenes long understood the superorganism to be dangerous. At one point in this fictional alternate history, the US government launched an investigation into the feasibility of using nuclear weapons to kill the life form. Although only the cover of this report was ever photographed, the conclusion seemed to be a resounding no. What made the Permian Basin superorganism so potentially catastrophic? The answers may lie deeper within.
In the early days of the pit, a mission called Project Freefall was planned to chart the organism to a greater depth than ever before. A joint effort between the US government and Russian scientists, the expedition involved a 6-person team lowered into the pit via specialized vehicle. Over a period of 2 weeks, the pod descended down the dark, wet, scooshy pit, reaching regions that had never been explored before. At last, the probe drilled through a dense layer of lower cartilage and entered an unknown region of blue tissue. A single-person pod was lowered into this opening. the Russian pilot described a reflective and prismatic environment of which we only have a single image from this onboard computer. When the pod was raised back to the surface, it was heavily damaged and the pilot was missing. The researchers concluded an attack from an unknown organism was the likely cause. Project Freefall makes it clear that the organic section of the mystery flesh pit is merely a portion of the life form, and other regions are unlike anything in the natural world. It also made it clear people aren't alone in the pit.
Even above the deeper layers, which weren't available to the public, hostile wildlife was frequently encountered. Large crustacean-like organisms were spotted as early as the first explorations, which this early sketch shows. In typical mystery flesh pit fashion, however, the corporate higher-ups turned these terrifying life forms into part of the marketing. Wildlife safety brochures were handed out to visitors, explaining the exciting anatomical fauna that dwelled in the pit, and how to avoid getting eaten.
This is disgusting.
At the foundation of the pit's ecosystem, playing a role similar to bacteria.
I do like speculative, collaborative fiction like this. This reminds me of an SCP type thing.
Bacteria in the bodies of regular-sized animals were macrobacteria. Unlike regular bacteria you can only spot under a microscope, macrobacteria were multicellular Goliaths that could reach lengths of 12 feet or 4 meters across. This educational chart produced by the Park Services showcases the various types of macrobacteria and the other bizarre species that dwell in this imaginary Permian Basin superorganism. We won't be able to cover them all, but one notable species is the mesogaleel tridecapod, an insect-like organism that gets its name from its 13 legs. As this faded, wild about nature infographic will tell you, these pseudovertebrates are almost the size of humans and aren't technically vampires, as this guide will assure you, although they do feed off the pit and look like something out of my nightmares. In other areas of the pit, there were sightings of other, more dangerous species, and even rumors of human-like life forms called merrowfolk, which Anodyne Inc. strongly denied. They maintained the mystery flesh pit was just like any other national park, and anyone who mysteriously vanished just didn't read their brochure carefully enough.
With the Permian Basin superorganism so hostile to human life, excavating it was a challenge. A challenge that began with finding people to staff it. As this oddly hilarious park ranger recruitment bulletin suggests, however, with the right benefits and incentives, Anodyne Inc. was in fact able to find people willing to enlist in the Mystery Flesh Pit Park Ranger program. What kinds of jobs did this entail? Well, why not become a park trail engineer? This anxiety-inducing position involved using compact stent frames and other highly specialized tools to create new pathways within the pit. To be a park trail engineer required extensive knowledge of caving, geology, and macrobiology, as attacks from local wildlife were apparently common. For personal protection, the laser scope anatomical environmental multi-tool was the most reliable defense. Intended to blast new paths within the mystery flesh pit, this portable tool, an example of which is on display here, was frequently used to ward off aggressive life forms. To more safely traverse the pit's interior, Anodyne Inc. developed the Internal Anatomy Vehicle, or IAV, a vehicle that could traverse the slickest and steepest of routes. Its maneuverability came in part from a rotating mechanical joint that connected the front of the vehicle to the midsection. As tourism increased, the larger Ventarial Environment Excursion Vehicle was developed, which we know from schematics used a set of twin counter-oriented screws for propulsion. These safari vessels could seat up to 8 park guests and take them deep into the pits with supposed safety.
Supposed being the key word here, as a mock-up of an incident report tells us that vehicles were bent, melted, crushed, dented, or dissolved at least on some occasions. Maybe traversing the unknown depths of a giant organism isn't a good idea after all. Well, as Caver Dave might say, that's not the right attitude for exploring the funderground. For adventurous park guests, the opportunity of camping on natural, unreinforced trails was possible with the interventarial tent, shown here in this diagram. Unlike traditional tents, this collapsible, multi-sided device could endure the crushing shifts and deadly wildlife of the pit while campers slept, at least most of the time. When things went wrong, emergency trail phones were one way to reach the park staff. Called lighthouses by seasoned hikers, these subterranean telecommunication devices were highly advanced for the 1970s. And indeed, the study of the Permian Basin superorganism led to numerous technological breakthroughs.
One of many lucrative results from the development of the fictional pit were tremendous advances in the field of computer science.
Enzo, how you doing?
In the early 1980s, Anodyne began to release computers made of nervous tissue taken from
Hats off. What do you want me to wear?
the Permian Basin superorganism. With 4 terabytes of organic tissue storage memory, these machines were extremely popular. An even more well-known product exported from the Mystery Flesh Pit was amniotic ballast, a miraculous fluid from deep within the pit, branded as Vita Salve in advertisements such as this one. The product could cure various illnesses and was almost certainly safe to use. But the most notable service Anodyne offered was access to the Mystery Flesh Pit itself. Aside from hiking,
what hats do I have? Flower crown, steampunk hat, construction hat, witch hat, fedora, jadora, a kind of straw cowgirl hat, a pirate hat, horns, a kind of tinfoil princess crown thing. Any of those.
Tourists paid for access to the amniotic thermal springs. The springs had
construction, cool,
strong effects on visitors who bathed in them, including making their skin healthier and giving them a euphoric sensation, as long as they could take their mind off the fact they were bathing.
The pirate hat is new.
In an unknown liquid. The true focus of the pit for most visitors, however, was the lower visitor center, a gateway into the deep that took 8 years to construct, with restrooms, a gift shop, and even restaurants. The lower visitor center was the hub of the national park. Was it a good idea to suspend a several-ton building on steel cables in the middle of the pit? Anodyne Inc. soon found out.
At last, we've come to the 2007 disaster and all that follows. On July 4th, 2007, due to Anodyne's negligence, something as simple as heavy rain and a faulty water pump caused a section of the pit to flood to unsafe levels. The result was a catastrophe most had never imagined. The Permian Basin superorganism began to wake up. Imagine waking up from a long nap to find hundreds of tiny bugs had built a miniature hotel in your throat. You'd be pretty mad. At 9:52 p.m., the lifeform began a choking response due to the flooding, causing the entire lower visitor center to be crushed and swallowed deeper into its gullet. But this was just the beginning. According to an incident report, the creature then started to surface, with people living all around West Texas witnessing limbs of the superorganism rising from the ground, the scale of which is captured in this impressionistic painting from a survivor. And then, the creature returned to its slumber, likely lulled back to sleep by a mysterious contingency measure redacted from the incident report. In the wake of the disaster, Anodyne Inc. was dissolved, and the park was finally closed to the public, with people perhaps finally realizing that hiking inside a giant creature isn't such a good idea after all. The author imagines that the region around the pit has now become a ghost town, but behind fences, some are still monitoring it. In the present of this alternate timeline, the Permian Basin superorganism is now kept under constant surveillance, but who knows when it might awaken once more. There's a lot more lurking in the pit you can read about online.
That's interesting. I like little fictional things like that. Rachology says, not sure if any of this stuff is good for stream, as he usually does multi-part stuff, but it's interesting and each usually stands alone as it focuses on an individual steps of a restoration project. His advert drops are cringe, though.
This video is brought to you by Established.
No. 3/8. And that's all before we even start to think about cleaning.
It's a little nail punch.
Does he do restoration work?
To more effort.
I think Jake has had me watch these.
This video.
The established titles thing. That's funny. Warning for racist content. I hear about established titles being a big scam. That doesn't surprise me at all. It always seemed scammy to me.
I started collecting racist objects when I was a teenager, and the stuff was everywhere. At a certain point, I ended up with thousands of pieces. I didn't know what I would do with it. I just thought a lot about what it meant to be a person of color living during Jim Crow. Had no intention of creating a museum, but the collection kept growing. So in the 1990s, I gave my collection to the university. It took 15 years, but in 2012, we opened this museum. I have lots of respect for museums that celebrate African American history, that celebrate African American accomplishment, but that's not what this facility was. I wanted to create an actual racism facility, to have people focused on this specific topic in terms of our history. So if you just have a society with millions of just postcards like this, does that reinforce certain ideas about black people and white people? Some of the best discussions we have in the museum are about the word nigger, which sounds kind of weird, by the way, because I'm a sociologist and we don't believe words have any inherent meaning. They're just sound signs that we give. But we do believe that people, once the meanings are given, that they are shared.
I mean, no piece is inherently racist. It's a racist society which will create racist objects and will racialize other objects. That's why the watermelon has a racial. There's nothing inherent about a watermelon that makes it racist. But you know darn well that it's been racialized.
Someone looking at Aunt Jemima objects or other mammy images, they don't think of that as offensive. They think of good times spent with their families. It's very nostalgic. Someone else looking at those same pieces, they see the vestiges of slavery and segregation. So often we're not deciding that something is racist, but what we are doing are collecting pieces that help us talk about racism. We have lots of friends of the museum, and we receive hundreds of pieces a year.
Yeah, in this context, the N-word can be used.
Director of the museum, he said to me one day,
like it can't be just someone saying it, right? Like in this sort of educational context, it's okay.
Hey, there's a couple guys I want you to meet.
Here we go. H-Bear says, I can't find any videos on it in English, but this is a thing that exists. Theme park devoted to ancient aliens. Jeez. Where was the thing?
So, here's some Jim Crow related materials. These are the dowels, and some of them are older, some are newer.
These are like 1950s.
This is
male
cute.
and female.
Yeah, those are really interesting.
They are. Our group of friends were all collecting this because we realized what it said about our society and what it said about where we were in the past and where maybe we still were. When we met David Pilgrim and the whole Jim Crow Museum and all of that, it was like, finally, there's a place where we can put this.
A sense of relief that we could let go of these
yeah.
objects so other people could learn from it.
We have some understanding of bigotry. We have some understanding of being the outsider or not being accepted or being told that we are not welcomed, we can't be accepted, you have no place here. I think because we've experienced that in our own lives, because we're gay, there's a little transference there to trying to help understand the even bigger question of bigotry and then likewise racism. Wow, this is really racist. This is an ashtray where the black washerwoman, she has her one breast stuck in the wringer and so she's hollering. My God, that's also sexist. I think the Jim Crow would love that.
This is the Jim Crow. This is on multiple levels. This is a wonderful piece.
Once we finally discovered the Jim Crow Museum, It gave us more impetus to go out and find, collect, save.
They now have at least 500 things from us. By collecting those things, we get a broader picture of how racism continued all the way up into the 60s and 70s and still continues. I've seen things about President Obama that were horrible.
I think people who go to the Jim Crow Museum are often surprised when they see something from 2015 as racist as many of the things from 100 years ago. And we've had friends who are a complete mess after they've left because suddenly they've been confronted with the truth.
For many years when I traveled, I would say that the United States, despite this history of enslavement and Jim Crow, that we are today more democratic and more egalitarian than we've ever been. And I stopped saying that about 2 years ago. I'm not suggesting that we are back in the Jim Crow period. Don't get it twisted. It's not like that. But what I am saying is I hear and see a level of racist rhetoric that is reminiscent of when I was growing up in Alabama under Governor George Wallace. People say they don't want to talk about race, but they're doing it all the time. But they're not talking about it in places where their ideas can be challenged.
Ooh. Hydrate. I'm trying to find something. We're almost to the end of the stream, and I want to find something not depressing to end on.
They are the handheld, take-anywhere books filled with superheroes, classic stories, or adult dramas. Some of them originally sold for only 10 cents, but now go for millions. With stunning artwork and legendary storytelling, their pages have captivated readers for over 80 years. This is the history of comic books.
Things are called comics.
Using images to communicate goes back to the 32nd century BC when Egyptians devised hieroglyphs with over 1,000 images representing ideas. In the same way, tapestries told stories through scenes depicted on the lush textiles in medieval European times. Mass production of paper allowed for the next medium of sequential art to emerge. While printed forms of picture-based stories appeared in Europe prior, the first American example of a comic strip came in the form of The Yellow Kid. The Kid's creator, Richard Outcault, infused the comic with political and social commentary. Due to the popularity of The Yellow Kid, other comic strips soon appeared. In 1933, Famous Funnies collected some of the serialized newspaper strips into a book format. Although this collection included reprintings, many historians have deemed this publication as the first comic book. In 1938, the golden age of comic books began with Action Comics #1. This first appearance of Superman ushered in the cape and cowl pop.
My favorite part of that cover, I have a reproduction of it sitting around somewhere, is the guy in the corner who's just like, oh god,
Popularity
show it,
of
please.
the superhero. The golden age would give birth to many of today's beloved heroes, including
Boo! I'll show you guys. the bottom left. I don't know why he's so funny to me. Like, yeah, that's probably what you... That's a correct response. Where were we?
Including Batman, Wonder
Logarth says, my insurance company is never gonna believe this bullshit.
Woman, Green Lantern, Captain America, and Captain Marvel. Many of the heroes grew so popular that they became symbolic elements in the war effort in World War II, and comic covers often depicted heroes beating up Hitler. Not all comics featured heroes, though. Many of the horror comics, such as EC's Vault of Horror, drew in readers who wanted their comics more dark and macabre. The taboo-breaking storylines and shocking artwork garnered too much attention. Psychiatrist Frederick Wertham filed a study called Seduction of the Innocent, where he claimed comic books to be a source corrupting the youthful readers. A Senate subcommittee investigated, and the comic industry self-imposed a set of codes and laws to keep comics upbeat and morally positive. In 1956, Showcase number 4 introduced the world to a new version of a DC comic favorite, The Flash. Thus, the Silver Age of comics began. During this time, Stan Lee and Jack Kirby at Marvel Comics would create some of the most beloved heroes, including Spider-Man, the Fantastic Four, and the Incredible Hulk. By the 1970s, the counterculture popularity no longer wanted clean-cut heroes. An underground movement of comics rose, and artists like R. Crumb published adult-themed comics in small presses. Since the use of the Comics Code was optional, the underground movement needed no permission, and they had no limitations on their subject matters. By the 1980s, the modern era of comics saw the big two publishers going head-to-head, Marvel and DC. While they battled for top billing, their characters appeared on television prime time in Saturday morning cartoons. In smaller presses like Pacific, Eclipse, and Fantagraphics slowly entered into the market. The graphic novel also rose in popularity during the 80s. These longer works sometimes were printed comic story arcs, but many featured original, unseen material. This longer form allowed for more in-depth storytelling, and the dramatic content often won literary awards. When the 1990s hit, the comic book artists grew in celebrity status. Their popularity allowed them something hardly seen in the industry: a split from the big two publishers. Todd McFarlane, Jim Lee, Rob Liefeld, and Jim Valentino formed their own company, Image, and rocked the comic book world. Events like the death of Superman brought comics into the public eye like never before. With the comic codes an outdated form of censorship, publishers abandoned its use. As digital readers became more prevalent, the comic book took new shape in digital form. With comic book characters so identifiable, so many of the comic books we read are made into film. Popular shows like The Walking Dead also use comic books as their source material. And so there's no question that the comic book industry entered a new high point in its history. So the next time you grab your favorite issue or graphic novel, appreciate how far comic books have come since the concept of sequential art began back in ancient Egypt.
All right, let's see who we're gonna raid.
Onions and peppers in this bitch?
And then
milk?
Lastly, you want to add a...
Why? Have a good night, everyone. I will see you tomorrow. And maybe we'll do crypto. I don't think we've done crypto stuff in a while. We'll make fun of some crypto bullshit. Have a good night. Love you too, Mr. Blast. I'm gonna go enjoy some Thanksgiving leftovers. All right, see you guys.